بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله على جزيل النعماء، والشكر له على ترادف الآلاء، واشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، واشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله إمام المتقين وسيد الأولياء، صلى الله وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله الأصفياء وأصحابه الأتقياء والتابعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I started out researching the Olympic flame ceremony. I saw Muslims celebrating about the Olympics and about Muslim athletes participating in them. And of course, many Muslim countries send official delegations to participate in the Olympics. It was clear to me for a long time that there's something wrong with this, but I wanted to explain a little more why. This has been discussed by others. The Sheikh Suleiman al-Kindi wrote a blog post about it, and he discussed some of the same things that I'm going to mention today, but I'm going to try to go a little more into detail. I found some very interesting things in the research. The origin of the Olympic Games, of course, was in ancient Greece. They held a game between the different, or games, between the different city-states where they competed. Even if they were at war, if the cities were at war with each other, they would have a truce during this time so that athletes could travel safely and compete against each other in the Olympics. And the games were dedicated. They were considered an act of worship, and traveling to go to them was a pilgrimage. And they were in the honor of Zeus, who is the supreme god of the Greek pantheon. So around 1300 after Hijrah, around 150 years ago, there was a movement to try to revive the Olympics. And one of the people who started this movement, his name was Pierre de Coubertin. So, or Coubertin, if you pronounce it anglicized. Pierre de Coubertin was one of the major revivers or advocates of sport. And he actually envisioned sport as being part of a sort of a new universal religion. Coubertin was a Mason, a Freemason, and this probably influenced a lot of his thinking about religion and his desire or his plan to make a world religion, a unified world religion. And he actually said, so I'm going to read a few quotes from Coubertin. "For me, sport is a religion, with church, dogma, and ritual." And he said that the Olympic Games, when he's talking about reviving the Olympic Games, he said Olympic Games should be inspired by religious sentiment, transformed and enlarged by the internationalism and democracy that distinguish the modern age. He also said the first essential characteristic of the Olympics, both ancient as well as modern, is to be a religion. It represents, above and outside the churches, humanity's superior religion. One of his students, or one of his admirers, Avery Brundage, who's from the United States, said, "Olympism is a religion with universal appeal, which incorporates all the basic values of other religions. A modern, exciting, virile, dynamic religion." And similar statements are on the Olympic Committee's website now. They define Olympism as a philosophy of life exalting and combining in a balanced whole the qualities of body, will, and mind. Blending sport with culture and education, Olympism seeks to create a way of life based on the joy found in effort, the educational value of good example, and respect for universal fundamental ethical principles. So these statements make it very clear that the Olympic Committee and the founders of the Olympics in general, they intended to create a universal religion which would unite all of humanity. And this is part of Coubertin's concept, is that because the Greek city-states would make a truce for the Olympic Games, he considered that it could be a means of achieving world peace, because the brotherly aspect of sports, that it has universal appeal, that it's healthy and everyone wants to be healthy. The idea was that this would bring humanity together and could be a means of ending war and creating universal brotherhood, and, as is mentioned in these quotes, to create a religion based on universal values. They saw different religions as having conflict with each other, so we said, okay, let's take these universal principles that we can all agree upon, and then we'll make a religion based on those, and then we'll end all war based on that. This is the kind of the concept of secularism, that let's get rid of the church because the church has been a cause of conflict, and we'll move to a universal religion, and that way we'll get rid of all this conflict. But while this is an attempt to create a universal religion, they very much went back to the Greek pagan religion and modeled the rituals of the modern Olympic Games after that. The original Olympic Games ran for almost 1,000 years, but they were canceled when the Roman Empire converted to Christianity, and the reason was because pagan worship was eventually banned. They were known and understood to be a ritual of pagan worship, which is why the Christians banned them. And they remained banned until, this was, 1,500 years later, when Coubertin decided to revive them. One of the most obvious examples of pagan worship in the Olympics is the Olympic torch ceremony. Now, the Olympic torch is an important part of the games. They light a torch at the site of the games, and this announces they light like it's like a bowl or something, where they put a big fire in it, and they light it with a torch. And this torch comes from the site of the Temple of Hera, where traditionally a fire was kept continuously burning in the Temple of Hera in honor of Zeus. And today, in the modern Olympics, they have a ceremony at the original temple where they light this torch, and then they transport it to wherever the Olympic Games are going to be. So even when it was in Japan or when it was Australia, they moved it by ship. So they lit the fire at the temple, and then they moved it, and in each place that they passed through, they have ceremonies and celebrations, recite poetry, and do different things like this until they get to the original site. So it starts months before the actual Olympics that they are transporting this sacred fire. A little about the ritual. When they light the torch, the ritual is performed by 11 Vestal Virgins. Now, the Vestal Virgins were a tradition in Rome. They were women who took an oath of celibacy. They did not marry for 30 years, and they started as young girls, and their responsibility was to keep the sacred fire burning, and it was believed that this fire represented the presence of the gods, and that if they allowed it to go out, that it would bring disfavor on the city. It was typically 6 Vestal Virgins in Rome that kept the sacred fire burning. But in the modern Olympic ritual, they have 11 Vestal Virgins. And this is where it got kind of interesting. Why 11? I started asking why 11. I started researching, and there's no explanation online of why. But Coubertin was a Mason, and the number 11 has a lot of importance in the Masonic initiation, or in the Mason mythology or numerology, or whatever you want to call it. In Masonic initiation, there are 11 steps. There are 3 degrees, I think apprentice, journeyman, I don't remember what the middle one is, then master Mason. And there's 11 steps on each one for a total of 33 degrees. So a 33-degree Mason is the highest level of Mason that somebody can get. When they do the Masonic initiation, they recite an oath 11 times, and they walk around an altar, which is for sacrifices, or like a table. They walk around this altar 11 times. They're making tawaf, or circumambulation of it. There's a famous chapel, which became famous because of a book by Dan Brown called The Da Vinci Code. It's in Scotland. It's called the Rosslyn Chapel, and this chapel is filled with Masonic symbology. And this chapel, it has 11 pillars holding up the chapel because of the importance of 11. The importance of 11, it relates to the 11 apostles, because they're originally, according to the Bible, 12 apostles, and then supposedly Judas betrayed Jesus. So the 11 are the true apostles after Judas's betrayal. And it also is related to the 11 sons of Jacob after Yusuf alayhi salam was taken to Egypt. And the importance of the number of 11, it's also important for starting a commandery. And a commandery is a type of Masonic organization. The normal Masonic organizations they're a-religious, supposedly. They say, oh, we accept people from any religion. Christians, Muslims, Jews can all join. But this commandery is a type of Masonic organization which is dedicated to the protection of a specific faith, usually Christianity. And this is a tradition that goes back to the Crusades and the Knights Templar. The number of individuals that are required to start a commandery is 11. This may be related to why there are 11 players on football teams and on cricket teams. The world's first football association, which standardized the rules for modern football, it was started at the Freemasons Tavern, and the association was formed by 11 football teams. And at that time, there were different rules. Some football matches, they would have 15 players or more, but they settled it at 11 at that, and that became the modern standard. Eventually, it took some decades before that became standardized for all football. But this was the best explanation that I could find for why they have 11 Vestal Virgins doing the ceremony. So they have these Vestal Virgins. So they're not really virgins, they're usually actresses and models that do it, which means they're probably not virgins, but it's none of my business. So what does the ritual consist of? They light the flame and they say a prayer. The text of this prayer is A'udhu Billah, Apollo, god of sun, and the idea of the light. Send your rays and light the sacred torch for the hospitable city of whatever. In the last Olympics they said Paris. And you, Zeus, give peace to all peoples on earth and wreath the winners of the sacred race. So it's actually a prayer to multiple gods of the Greek pantheon. And they're still saying this today. And it's weird that they say, oh, this is a universal religion that everyone can participate in, but then they openly worship Greek gods. So we have the Founders Olympics. They're calling it a religion, and they're openly putting prayers to pagan gods in it. And then they recite a poem. Now, I couldn't find the exact poem, but I know that it's by a poet called Pindar. And he wrote a number of Olympic elegies or poems about the Olympics. And I found one that they have recited in an Olympic ritual related to the torch before. And I've looked at the text of it, and it does specify they're invoking the son of Kronos, meaning Zeus, and they invoke multiple gods, including Poseidon, and they invoke Zeus multiple times. So again, this is a poem, and they specify that the games are to honor Zeus, who's, right, the god of lightning and the whatever. So what's interesting is that Zeus, the Roman name of Zeus, is actually Jupiter. And when they had the London Olympics, they timed it so that the Olympic Games started when Jupiter, the planet, rose above the horizon in England. And when Jupiter rose above the horizon, then they had everyone kind of planned in advance to bang pots and ring bells. And they rang bells all over Britain. Every church rang their bells. And of course, we called the hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Al-jarasu mazamiru ash-shaytan. The bell is the musical instrument of shaitan. And there's a lot of blatantly satanic things, especially about the opening and closing rituals, but I'm not even going to get into that because they're different each year. So I'm just talking about the things that are consistent every year. And they also have an Olympic anthem, which is a song that they sing in the opening ceremony every year. And this Olympic anthem, it refers to the flame, the fire, as being immortal and eternal. And this was composed by Spiros Samaras, who was also a Freemason. So I really hope that this will be enough to convince any Muslim to have a hatred of the Olympic Games in their heart and have an enmity towards them, and to advise the Muslims in general that this is part of another religion, and it's not universal, it's pagan, and it's very, very Western paganism, Greco-Roman tradition, and that it is actually a Masonic plot to create a one world religion which will erase and destroy other religions as part of a sort of broader project to achieve utopia or heaven on earth, which is really not the purpose of our existence. We're meant to be tried and we're meant to face difficulties in this life so that it will become manifest who has the most taqwa. We should not be celebrating victories of Muslim athletes in these events. It's not a victory. It's a humiliation and it's apostasy, to be honest. But may Allah forgive us and increase us in knowledge and beneficial knowledge and application of that knowledge. And I will end with Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in.